Welcome to the MrSnowy Show. Today we're going to be reviewing the impacts of housing affordability here in Canada. The topic of this podcast that we're going to be discussing is: to what extent is the federal government addressing the housing cost crisis in Canada, and which ethical principles should they consider when making these decisions? So with that in mind, we're going to be looking over 6 sections. First, what's so significant about the question I chose? Second, how we got here. Third, the causes and consequences. Fourth, we will be looking at different perspectives on the matter. Fifth, ethical judgment. And finally, last but not least, what evidence do we have that supports the answer to my question? Let's first talk about significance. The main idea we are discussing is important because everyone is affected by the crisis. This idea of the housing crisis comes from both the poor and middle class. When an entire generation of young Canadians, newcomers, and working class families feel completely locked out of the housing market, trust in the government can feel weak at times. That's when people feel the system is failing to meet their basic needs, as well as failing to keep the trust between both sides, public institutions, and traditional political parties. What I found interesting and would be good to know is on the Canadian Human Rights Commission website, the opening sentence reads, "Adequate housing is more than just 4 walls and a roof. It is a place to live in security, peace, and dignity. It is essential to physical and mental health, community, and sustainability. Having an affordable, suitable, and safe place to live helps people and families succeed and thrive." I'm going to let you give that some thought for a second. Now let's move on to how we got here. The issue has developed over time due to inflation, uncontrolled immigration, wars, and the COVID-19 pandemic, and also many other factors. This uncontrolled immigration makes it so that Canadian-born citizens are the minority of new homeowners due to the mass amounts of immigrants. So that means they are putting a strain on the supply of housing since they keep buying out new houses for their families to live in. It boils down to the supply and demand economic law. It pretty much works like that. And I'm not trying to sound controversial, but it's the truth. I'm just speaking facts here. I really am. And it seems like this problem is going to continually persist, since everyone thinks equity matters. Okay, let's now move on to cause and consequence. One of the most dangerous impacts of the housing crisis is that it gives up the very workers society relies on daily. Federal, provincial/territorial, or municipal government employees, such as teachers and medical professionals, can no longer afford to live in the communities where they work. This leads to severe staffing shortages in hospitals and schools, and forces workers into grueling 2-hour commutes, leading to rapid burnout. But why is this the case? Think of this. A private sector tech worker or digital marketer might have the flexibility to relocate to a cheaper rural town or different province to work remotely, while a public school teacher, a city bus driver, or a hospital worker must physically show up to a specific building in a specific city every single day. After the pandemic, too, people usually, for the most part, got accustomed to staying at home to do work. But now it's different. So with that, the government is now aggressively forcing RTOs, or return to office, mandates onto workers. A short-term consequence may be the demand for rentals has shattered records. Up to 2 in 5 Canadian renter households spend more than the recommended 30% of their income on shelter. This financial uncertainty has led to a spike in more evictions, illegal rent increases, and a dramatic rise in shelter usage and homelessness across the country. Let's continue with perspective. The everyday people are the most deeply affected stakeholders, but they are far from a unified group. We are very fractured from what you would think. we are split up into 3 different groups. 1, the renters. 2, the youth and millennials, or some would say aspiring buyers. And 3, established homeowners. Even though sufficient homeowners have the privilege to have a home, their perspective is overlooked. This is because they are not going to understand what it is like to be homeless or not having or have inadequate housing. And they are not going to be bothered by this issue because of how supposedly rich they are. And I would have to agree with this point of view. It doesn't seem ethical or reasonable to let this part of society have an opinion on this. Anyways, all 3 governments have the same interests. Elected officials who want to get reelected or trapped in a tightrope walk, trying to appease renters who want the prices to drop, without angering homeowners who vote consistently and don't want their equity erased. Let's now move on to ethical judgments. The right thing for Canada to do right now is to take the human right for housing seriously. Canada must push to expand its non-market housing sector. Instead of using public money to subsidize private developers or give tax breaks to condo buyers, the government, through initiatives like the federal Build Canada Homes Agency, needs to buy up unsold properties and build dedicated, permanently affordable units where rent should be strictly capped at 30% of a person's income. Housing should be treated like healthcare or education, a public good. Utilitarians can argue that the private housing market creates massive negative externalities like homelessness, extreme financial stress, and mental health crisis, and etc. That places a heavy financial burden on public healthcare, policing, and emergency shelters. Housing is an absolute right based on human dignity. It must be provided regardless of the economic cost. Let's now move on to the final part of this podcast, the evidence. Right here, what I have on the screen right now, are all the most credible sources / websites I personally found throughout the internet and I've used for this podcast. I believe that these 4 sources are most trustworthy because 2 of them come from the Government Canada website, though even may come with its bias along with it. Then the other sources are not from the government, but come from organizations that are legit and can be reliable. One more good point from the Canadian Human Rights Commission website says this: using a human rights-based approach to housing policy reinforces the expectation that legislation, policies, and programs affecting housing will emphasize participation, empowerment, accountability, and non-discrimination while fulfilling the human right to adequate housing. A human rights-based approach also focuses on the groups with the greatest housing need, including people with lived experience of housing need and homelessness. A point made from one of the Canadian government says this: the industrial strategy for home building will explore how the supply chain, new building techniques, and building materials can be leveraged so all order of government and industry can build homes smarter, faster, and at prices Canadians can afford. This is what we have been all waiting for. I am very much looking forward to this happening in the near future. What do you guys think of this podcast? The topic or the central idea of this? If you want to share your thoughts, leave a comment down below. I have left the links I used to make this podcast possible in the description for you guys to look at. Thanks for listening to my podcast, my first ever podcast here on the channel, although it'll probably be the last one. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.